Politics and religion, not exactly an easy intersection to navigate in a country predicated upon a separation of church and state. But for one actor, comedian, political commentator, and broadcaster, and by the way, so much more, it is the subject of a new best-selling book which claims politicians have weaponized religion on their path to power, amongst other things. It is called Separation of Church and Hate, a sane person's guide to taking back the Bible from fundamentalists, fascists, and flock-fleecing frauds. It's written by John Fugelsang, and he joins me now, clearly a fan of alliteration in the service of enlightenment, amongst many other things. John Fugelsang, we're honored to have you here.
What a great pleasure. Can I tell you how great your show is? It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. People like you coming on and writing books like this is part of what makes what we do fun, and we feel lucky to do it. First of all, I can't believe, congratulations, bestseller.
Thank you.
First book, which seems incredible because people know you from TV, from so many other places, your stand-up and beyond. Why did it take so long to write a book?
Took so long to sell a book. I first pitched this book back in the summer of 2010 when my dad was in hospice, and he helped me write my first book proposal. And I was told for years, wait, this is a book about believers, and it's for believers and atheists, about how to use the Bible against right-wing Christian nationalists and fundamentalists. There's no audience for that. Atheists and believers? And I pitched it for years. I had publishers tell me, I don't know any Christian fundamentalists. This doesn't affect me. Finally, Simon & Schuster, like 13 years later, took a chance on it. And it's really nice to have had the New York Times list for 7 weeks after so many years of trying to convince people there was an audience for this.
Well, I want to talk about the reaction to the book because it's been amazing and I've been reading a lot of it. We'll get there. But a couple of things you mentioned I want to pick on. For one, right-wing fundamentalists, as you mentioned, right? Do you feel like it's just people on the right wing potentially who are misinterpreting scripture as you lay out in this book?
Yes, in all religions.
Okay.
I think it is the far-right fundamentalists of all the world's great religions who are ruining religion for the rest of us. When folks say, oh, religion's responsible for oppression of women and homophobia and violence, no, it's the far-right fundamentalist wings of all religions. Far-right fundamentalist Muslims, Jews, Christians, they're the ones making it very interesting for the rest of us. The overwhelming majority of moderate and liberal, even conservative Christians, Muslims, and Jews getting along just fine right now, making families, making businesses, not getting any media coverage for it. It's always, always the zealots who get all the ink.
One of the things I appreciate about this book is the structure with which you write it. And you're showing your work. You're quoting scripture, someone who understands scripture, and we should speak about your understanding of religion, your faith, your parents. We'll talk about that in a second. But talk about the structure and how you lay out the premise, the argument, and then the way that scripture has been misinterpreted.
The book is a guide to how to use the Bible for believers and atheists when you're debating anything that divides us with your right-wing Christian loved ones, the nationalists or whatever you want to call them, fundamentalists. And it goes through every issue that divides us, from women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ equality, healthcare policy, how we handle poverty, gun safety, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. And it shows how even if you're an atheist, if you are debating a right-wing Christian fundamentalist, Jesus is probably on your side whether you believe in him or not, whether he's a literal person or not. And I got tired of seeing my mom and dad's faith used as a cloaking device for so much meanness. I was raised to believe that Christianity was about the stuff that Jesus talked about, servant leadership, going to the margins to help the less fortunate. Matthew 25, he says, individuals and nations will be judged by how they care for the poor, care for the sick, welcome the stranger, and care for those who are incarcerated. Like so many, you grow up in, it's like this religion of love and empathy has been hijacked by this mean little tax-free clique.
Your parents are such a big part of why you are on this path. They raised you to be, as you say, a free-thinking Catholic. And
free-thinking, sexually repressed Catholic.
Okay, all right, but you're so debonair, I can't imagine that you're sexually repressed. But let's talk about the fact that you said that your parents broke a promise with God, and that's why you're here. Explain that.
My mom entered the convent right out of high school. She stopped being Peggy and became Sister Damien. This was before the Omen, so there were no jokes about that. The convent put her through nursing school and then sent my mother off to work with lepers in Malawi, Africa. My dad was a Franciscan brother. He wore the Jedi robes and the rope belt and taught history to Catholic boys in Brooklyn. And my father, the brother, met my mother, the sister, fell madly in love, couldn't tell her. He had promised God he would never fall in love, so he became pen pals when she went off to Africa. And after about 10 years, he finally had the guts to ask her out on a date, and so she left the convent. They were married 2 months later, and they settled on the Isle of Long and tried to raise us, as you said, to be progressive, free-thinking Catholics, which took a lot of years to make sense to me. But ultimately, Jesus, whether he is a literal figure or not, I don't ask anyone to believe anything supernatural. I'm not trying to convert anyone to any cause. It's strictly a guide for anyone of any faith background who has to deal with one of these right-wing folks, because Jesus is not on their side. And the problem with right-wing fundamentalist Christianity is this: they don't fight for anything Jesus talked about. They don't fight for God. They don't fight for religious freedom. They're not fighting against Satan. They always fight for conservative Christian power. That's it. Everything is structured around that. Nothing about the poor. It's always about conservative Christian power. And that's not fighting for Jesus. So go ahead and fight for that. But they have a First Amendment right to twist Scripture, and we've got a First Amendment right to call them out for it.
Well, twisting Scripture, it's a matter of interpretation to some degree, I suppose, and that's part of what your book does. And you talk about, and let's go back, we'll table the sexually repressed, we'll talk about free thinking and being Catholic, and just talk about the coexistence then between dogma and being free thinking. Because again, misinterpretation may lead to some people perverting the principles of the Scripture, but does free thinking and dogma, how do they coincide?
That's a great question. I mean, free thinking and dogma coincide every hour of every day, sometimes very well, sometimes not at all. And it's generally the conflict that leads to a lot of progress.
Right.
It also leads to a lot of people disengaging from their church, disengaging from their spiritual life. We hear a lot about people who are transitioning away from religion, and that's fine. I'm not trying to get anyone to join a religion, but I think in many cases, people have mistaken the cruelty of a church they belong to or a church they grew up in, and they mistake that for faith itself, right? Like, there's so much diversity of faith. And if you feel that your church is mean, if your church is not telling you to love your enemies, but keeps on telling you who your enemies are, you're not really in a church. And it may not be that there's anything wrong with you. This may be God or the universe's way of saying, you've outgrown your church. And my parents were people who transformed their whole lives. They gave up their names, their chastity, they took vows of poverty, and then 16 years later had a different spiritual calling. And sometimes changing your mind about religion is the most spiritual thing you can do.
Well, your parents exist as these leading lights for you. It's evident, your adoration for them, especially the principles that they imbued you with, which has allowed you to then create your own sort of, not just interpretation, but recognition, right, your recognition of what you're seeing in the Scripture. It's interesting, though, because you also talk about Christian activists being the ones who've been the ones to stand up to Christian fundamentalists. You talked about Dr. King and others. Just tell the folks about that.
Sure. I mean, with the Bible, I do think it's a lot easier to ask questions of your loved ones. I just want to add that on. I think you get further with your right-wing loved ones by pointing out and showing them in the Scripture where Jesus was not an immigrant-hating homophobe, than if you just call your uncle an immigrant-hating homophobe. But the entire history of Christianity, from the time Rome took over the operation and it stopped being about this homeless, brown-skinned Jewish faith healer in the poor neighborhoods in Galilee, when it became about dogma and hierarchies and power, well, then it became about war. And they're slaughtering Jews and Muslims and pagans in the Crusades. And St. Francis of Assisi renounces the violence and walks unarmed through a war zone to host peace talks between the Sultan and the armies. He renounced all war. And then you've got the doctrine of discovery. And the Vatican says, go and rape different lands, take their resources, subdue the people. You're doing it all for God. And this is what empire does. We're doing the opposite of what Jesus says, but we're doing it for Jesus. So Columbus is slaughtering and mutilating and raping in the shadow of the cross. And it's the Catholic priest on his ship's third voyage, Father Bartolomeo de las Casas, who committed maybe the first act of protest by a white person in this hemisphere, writing to the Queen to protest the appalling ways Columbus was treating the indigenous folks. They knew it was against Jesus back then. Slavery was propped up by Christianity in this country, but you've got Christ followers like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and the Quakers pushing back. Hitler is the ultimate Christian nationalist, and Christ followers like Dietrich Bonhoeffer give their lives in service of their Jewish brothers and sisters. Segregation, propped up by Christianity again, and it's the Christ followers like Dr. King out of Ebenezer Baptist Church using nonviolence and Scripture itself to shame white America out of the apartheid of segregation. And think about all the kids and people that have talked their parents and grandparents out of so much homophobia in the last 30 years, because homophobia is not compatible with any part of Jesus. There's an incredible history of Christian activism, but it's almost always, Amrit, almost always in opposition to Christian authoritarianism.
John, I can't imagine a better time for a book like this right now, as people are gathering around familial tables to have conversations, and so often steeped in things like the Scripture. You've given people a way not just to look at the issues, but to look at Scripture and to stoke these conversations, because at the end of the day, that is the living, breathing spirit of Scripture, is a conversation and communion, isn't it?
I think so. And in many ways, you know, I talked to a rabbi here who says when Jesus is fighting the Pharisees, in some cases, that's just how we throw down as Jews. We just go at it on Scripture. And I've always admired that, and I've always loved it. I grew up with a lot of that in my family. My dad, my God, he was quoting Scripture and arguing with his right-wing loved ones all the time. And a lot of families can do it. A lot of families have people who disagree politically, and they argue with the Bible and history, and they don't hate each other. You don't see it too much on TV, but they're still out there. And I do believe that we can build these bridges. And look, the only way you can follow both Donald Trump and Jesus is if you've never read either one of their books. The only thing those guys have in common, they spent a lot of time with prostitutes, and they both use ghostwriters. But otherwise, we don't need to hate each other. This is all about using what's actually in the Bible and make them argue with God. God commands us to welcome the stranger. Jesus says we'll be judged, heaven or hell, by how we welcome the stranger. So ask your uncle, why should I listen to you and Donald Trump and reject God and Jesus? Just ask the question.
It took you 12 years to sell this book. I can't imagine it'll take that much longer for you to sell the next. You are a fountainhead of so many ideas. This book is called Separation of Church and Hate, A Sane Person's Guide to Taking Back the Bible for Fundamentalist Fascists and Flock-Fleecing Frauds.
No one has said the title that quickly. I want you to
Well,
know
listen,
this.
man, alliteration is something that I work on.
Right on, me
and
too.
you do it really well. Thank you so much,
What a
Mr.
pleasure.
Fugelsang.
What a great show you've got. Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate having you
Peace.
here. All right.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage. And click the subscribe button here. You can also download our app and watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.